Hi, Tonya.
Hi. It's lovely meeting you.
Very nice to meet you too. I've been very gently stalking your Facebook page for like a little bit.
You
Uh,
don't have to be gentle.
Facebook stalking, because yeah, real serious stalking sucks. I could tell that like you're really busy and really active right now in spite of all like the COVID stuff. Did I see that you're currently working on like a Shakespearean play?
I just finished one that we aired it last Sunday, actually. Not yesterday, but the week before. We aired it and then we did a live Q&A afterward.
That's amazing. I had no idea that people were still doing, so you're like recording then plays and like broadcasting them for your audience with like COVID and social distancing and everything.
Well, this play in particular was scheduled to show for the first time on March 15th.
Oh wow,
And
yeah.
that morning it was canceled.
Yeah, that
The
was
Ides of
really
March was
bad.
strong. So
Well,
we ended up doing some rehearsals over Zoom, trying to stay fresh and everyone keep their lines. And then when the pandemic didn't go away, we decided that, all right, what if we filmed it and then aired it online so that all of our hard work wasn't for nothing?
Give me some music. Music. Moody food bus to trade and love. Go to the river. There, my music playing far off. I will betray tawny fin fishes. My blended hook shall pierce their slimy jaws. And as I draw them up, I'll think them every one in Antony and say, aha, you're cut. That time I laughed him out of patience. And that night I laughed him into patience. And the next morn at the 9th hour I drunk him to his bed.
so like you're an actress and a model, and you're a writer too. Yes,
I'm a writer first.
you're a writer first. Oh, I
Yeah.
like it.
See, I'm an author, an actress, and a model, and that's the order that I like to do them, but they
Aw.
pay in this order.
Yes, I am author, and then really that's basically, most of the thing. And yeah, it doesn't pay well.
But that's okay. I mean, that's why we continue to do it. Obviously, we love it. It's not about the money, it's about the passion for our art.
Yes, for
But
sure.
you do other types of art, don't you? Aren't you an
Uh,
actual like drawing artist?
Yes. I guess occasionally I'll post like a sketch or something that I do on my Facebook or my Instagram. It's something like I've drawn ever since I was a little kid. And people love it when I draw, but I'm never happy with my drawings. So most of my energy goes into writing because I feel like I have at least some command over like language. I feel like I'm able to kind of get where I want to go when I'm writing. Whereas when I'm drawing, I always feel like I see something that I'm not able to actually create. I also do some photography, and I'm working a little bit on doing more like videography kind of stuff. I find photography is a nice mindless outlet for me because I can just go out and find pretty things and then frame them in a pretty way. And
So is it more nature that you like to
yeah,
photograph?
like I like to go out and take pictures of like teeny tiny mushrooms, like real up close, because that's just something, and it's something I've been doing more now with COVID and stress happening, because yeah, that's something that like I'm not really trying to express anything other than capturing sort of the little things that people usually overlook. That's what I do when I am doing photography. So it's not like there's not an end goal other than finding the things that people don't usually see and then taking pictures of them.
Hopefully, or you'll be able to present it to them and they'll appreciate it too, right?
Exactly. That's the idea. Yeah.
I am curious how 2020 has affected your ability to jump into new things without hesitation.
Let's see. It's okay. It's like, I think for a lot of people, it's been both a gift and a curse. Mostly it has sucked. It's not very easy to go out. I think I probably spent the last 2 years doing like a lot of events and signings and meeting people, which is something that was very scary for me because I usually consider myself an introvert. Until like 2 years ago, I never would have even considered doing a show like this. And now it's kind of become something that I do pretty frequently. 2020, of course, has meant I'm like back to a lot of my introvert ways, but it has also meant, doing things in different ways. I spent a lot of the beginning of quarantine doing live readings of my book.
Finally, he looked at Cam and said, "Go and bloody find her." She stood, clapped the hilt of her blade to her shoulder, and left. Why jeopardize her chance to look for Erica? Cam's worldview had already shifted to include the fact that Erica was telepathic. The evidence was too strong to argue against. Erica had also mentioned that her brother and her cousin possessed strange abilities. But what about her? Erica had seen something important in Cam's mind, and she had also been in pain. There were pieces Cameron still didn't understand, and those missing parts quickened her steps.
And that was a new thing, and that was a cool thing, and I learned a lot doing it. Now I sort of feel like COVID fatigue is really starting to set in, and I'm sort of at that point now where it's like, at this point, I'm like not excited and not looking for new things. I'm just sort of like, I want to just like kind of get under a blanket and take lots of naps.
Oh. See, I'm with you where as soon as quarantining started, so yes, I was really, really upset about not doing the show. Yeah. But in terms of all the things that I had to go out in the world and do, I had, like 2 to 3 meetings a week, and I had to go to events and maybe help organize a signing. It became very easy for me to just, I have to stay in my cave and just focus on my work. Okay. Just like that. I was back to, I lived this kind of lifestyle before I stepped out into the world and started sharing my work. So I reverted back to my nomad, or not nomad, but my just quarantine lifestyle was what I had before.
Yes. Now I grew
up. Then we started doing everything on Zoom, and so I really am just as busy as I was. I just don't have to drive from place to place.
I grew up in a teeny tiny little town in West Virginia. And it was a place where you sort of like had to create your own entertainment. There was like not much to do. So I got like really, really good at just kind of like hunkering down in my own little private space and like reading books and writing and stuff. And then as an adult, I sort of like forced myself to actually go out and interact with other human beings and, participate in the world. And so, yeah, COVID has been like a nice opportunity at some times to kind of like go back to that sort of like quietness. But I've also discovered that I tend to get really messy when there's no one else around. I didn't have my kids with me for like the first 4 months of quarantine because I had to be an essential worker, and my apartment became a complete disaster zone. So they're back now on weekends, and I'm like organizing the way I should have while they weren't here, because having other humans around, I'm like, okay, I have to actually do something about this because it's not just me.
What you said triggered two questions for me. So they're completely unrelated. You were talking about the books that you read as a kid. So I want to know, what was your favorite childhood book? But I also want to know, if you could afford to pay someone to do something on a regular basis that you don't want to do, if you could afford to do that, what would it be?
The first book series that I really got into when I was a little kid was Nancy Drew. That was sort of like what kicked me off. And then
I'm in love with that right now.
I was so lucky. My library had like the original Nancy Drews, like back in the very, very first versions. Nancy Drew was badass. And then someone went in, I think during like either the 40s or the 50s, like very shortly after they'd been published, and they like toned her down a little bit to make her a little bit more acceptable for the times. And so very few of the original Nancy Drew, versions of Nancy Drew exist now. And like the library that I had was very old. And no one had cleaned out the shelves in forever. And so I got to read like the original Nancy Drews. And then if I could hire someone to do one thing for me, like all the time, it would definitely be cleaning. Like there's absolutely no question about it. I hate cleaning. I love to cook. I love to like decorate and like organize things. Like, I understand that toilets have to be scrubbed. And I will do it, but I don't want to. I really don't want to. What about you? What books did you love to read as a kid?
It's sad. I really loved The Call of the Wild and White Fang. And then I grew up and found out that he's a total racist. And it's like, his art is beautiful and I love the work, but it hurt me to know that something I loved so much came from such a vile mind,
Yeah, that is so hard. I think I have Call of the Wild right here somewhere behind me. And then on that topic, the one I'm struggling with right now is J.K. Rowling's whole, he's gorgeous. Like the illustrated Harry Potter book sets that someone gave me for my birthday earlier this year. And then in the last few months, I still pull them down and I read them to my kids. But at the same time, like I've really struggled with all of the issues with the negative way that she's been impacting the LGBTQ community. Right. And so, yeah, it really, it sucks so much when you read something and you fall in love with something and that thing speaks to you in like a really, critical and important way, especially when you're young. And then later on, you find things out. That's like such a deep and like really, pardon my French, shitty betrayal.
I think it's okay to still appreciate the art.
Yes,
they're still good books. They're still good stories, but you just need to show your children a better mentality. And it's not like the books themselves are creating that bias. It's if they follow her, and that's where you could step in and say, this is not the right way to think, and this is not how you treat people who are different.
We're still reading them, and we've been having conversations as we go through them. Especially, there are more things that, for the most part, I think the underlying message of Harry Potter, and I think part of the reason why the whole issue of J.K. Rowling has been such a big deal is because her books really do speak, I think, to people who feel like, they aren't sort of part of the mainstream community. I think that Harry Potter really, really reaches out to people who feel underprivileged and feel like they've been cast aside. And that's sort of like a really primary message of them. Like it's built into the fabric of the book. And then for the author to kind of like betray that message, I'm like, she became smart. And like I have all these theories on it, of course, because I've like been on and on about it for like months now. It's like such a critical betrayal of the message itself. It's not like, she like had this one good idea and then also she was like a bad person in other ways. It's like she's betrayed like the very thing.
Right. She's betraying herself.
Yeah. She betrayed her own message. That one's hard, but yeah. So what you are author first, actress second, model third. Do you ever find that like one of those things can have a tendency to take over, or do you find that those different things that you're drawing from, do they like feed each other? Because I can imagine that I am not an actor. I will never be an actor. I'm one of those people who I get in front of the camera and I like if someone is recording me in an attempt to get me to like portray a certain thing, I'm like gonna like totally freeze up and blank. It's not gonna happen. So I can imagine that acting, I feel like it's something that could potentially, you know, sort of feed your writing life in some ways, because you're getting to actually be other people in a way. And I don't know, that's sort of what I feel like I'm kind of sort of doing when I'm writing. Do you find that to be the case? Do those two things
It
like
definitely, they feed each other. I mean,
Yeah.
you find good storytelling in scripts and you find bad storytelling in scripts, and you start thinking about things visually because it has to play out on screen. It really helps with the show don't tell aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest influences that the two have had, I've done some casting and I've done situations where, you know, you have someone come in an audition and they can have a stellar performance and just still not be right for the part.
Mm.
And so that helped a little with the querying process where, you know, just because I'm not a good fit for their agency doesn't mean it's a bad book, you know?
Yeah.
And I will say that because I've queried my book over and over again and I still don't have an agent, when I don't get a part for an audition, it's, you know, I'm not right for the part. It doesn't hurt as much as an agent saying they don't want my book.
That is, I think that like querying is one of the things in writing that requires, like, the whole writing process is one thing in and of itself. That's like a journey. And then querying is like a whole separate process.
Yes.
And like, having that kind of perspective, that must be really nice. I first started querying when I was like in, like, I don't know, probably my mid to late 20s. And I was so not ready for it. And it was, especially at first, like on the one hand, I was like, I know that this is like not that big of a deal. You know, like if I get rejected, like it's still going to happen, like whatever. And then a rejection letter or a rejection email would come in and I'd be like, for 2 or 3 days, it would just be like, I'm the worst person on the face of the planet. Writing is like literally my only skill. If there were an apocalypse, I would die because I can't do anything else. And book isn't even good enough to get an agent? What? Yeah.
There are times where it's like, oh, this agent that I loved her so much. She would have been so perfect. I wanted to work with her, and she requested a full, and then she rejected it. And now I should just quit everything I do. I should quit acting. I should quit modeling. I should just quit everything.
Yeah.
Like, which is ridiculous. But
yeah.
in the moment, it just feels, you know, you have this whole woe is me. I should quit everything artistic because I'm just not good enough because this one person says I'm not a good fit.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it's so hard not to go there because it's your baby.
Right. It's your heart and soul, you know? If you don't get a part, you're not right for somebody else's vision. But if you don't get your book picked up, it's like your soul isn't right.
Yes. I have had 2 babies. And I don't think I would take it as personally if one of them, you know, if like someone was like, your kid sucks, I would be like, whatever, my kid is awesome. But if someone is like, your book sucks, I'm like, you just cut me to the core and I cannot deal, because my book is also defenseless against you. Like my children will fight back. Like my book is just like, it's there and it's like sad now. So
So ultimately, did you go with an agent or did you end up doing it yourself?
I ended up sort of like 50-50. My
hybrid
was weird. I queried for a really long time. And I had always sort of talked about like maybe doing indie publishing. And then I ended up I had the really good fortune of meeting some indie artists when I moved here to Baltimore. Like the indie art scene in Baltimore is incredible. That was probably the biggest surprise that I discovered on moving here. I had lived in Washington State. I had lived in like Louisiana and South Carolina. And then I got here in Baltimore and I'm like, Baltimore. There are so many people here who are like doing cinematography and like making movies and publishing books, and they're just doing it on their own. And I was like really fortunate to sort of like land in that community, and a lot of people were like, just go for it. Like, why wait? Like, once you get an agent, they'll spend like a couple of years, you know, like putting your book around, and then it'll take like 2 or 3 years after that to get published. You have other ideas, like get it out the door. Cause I'd been sitting on it for probably like 3 or 4 years. So I was like, okay. So I reached out to someone in Baltimore who does like the interior formatting kind of stuff to get it moving. And that person actually had their own publishing company called Clickworks Press. And he was like, I like your book. Do you want us to publish it? And I was like, sure. So yeah, the Altered Wake, my first book, was ended up being published with Clickworks Press in 2018, and they're an awesome little indie publisher, and I've been really, really happy because simultaneously, like, I have a lot of freedom to like take my book around to like different signings and sort of like wherever I want to go with it, and I have a lot of sort of control over the end product, but like I don't have to upload it to Amazon or do any of the digital stuff, which is like my worst nightmare.
It falls under that list of things we want to pay other people to do, right?
It's honestly the perfect arrangement for me. The second book in my series is done. I'm just like doing editing stuff now and have been for like probably a year because I'm slow. And yeah, like, I don't know. I've been really happy with that. What is your book about? Like, what have you written about? What do you write? I love that.
So the feedback that I'm getting is they like the writing, they like the voice, but they have an issue with one of the characters, and I get it. He's not for everyone. He has a darkness to him, and some people don't want to promote that. I've gotten a lot of, I totally want to read this book, but I can't put it on my list. You know, it's, you know, a woman who falls in love with her stalker kind of situation, but it's not as cut and dry as that.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to cut it to the base elements,
sure.
I understand not being able to put your stamp behind that.
But you know what? That's like one of those things that it's like, if your voice is good and like the writing overall is good and it's kind of catching people, and it's just sort of like the question of this one character, you just need to find like that, the people who are going to like kind of get it. You know what I mean?
Right. Like, I mean, obviously I haven't found the right agent for this particular book. So I would definitely query a lot. I have a list of people that I would query with a different book, and I am working on 2 other books right now. Yeah. So once they're shiny, I will start querying those.
That's the way to do it, is just kind of like keep throwing stuff out there until something like catches, because it's kind of like, that's just sort of like how the system works is. And that's like one of the huge debates that I had in the whole, like, you know, do you go indie or do you go traditional? Like, on the one hand, traditional, you have the support of, you know, this massive machine behind you, you know what I mean?
Right.
You have the support of these traditional presses that kind of like have the momentum to like,
and the connections to get it out in the world and the places you want it to be.
Because isn't that the point when you're a writer, is like you've written this thing and yeah, it's cool and you like it, but ultimately the point of writing the thing is for other people to read it, and you want to maximize, like, especially if you feel like what you're saying is important, you want to maximize the number of people who it's going to get in front of, not just from like you know, I would like to eventually be like just a writer someday. That would be cool. You know, like make your living off of that. But then also like that's you want to talk to people. If you're writing, then it's because you want to speak and communicate something. And so, yeah, a big publisher is like going to get you there once you get to that point. It's just the question of like getting yourself into the gearworks.
Right. And I think that because it is a risky book for a debut author. So maybe I need to prove myself with something a little less scary to people. And then it'll be, well, we already like her, so we'll go ahead and accept this book. And that one happens to be a series too. So,
well, the fact that you're getting requests for full manuscripts is an excellent sign. That's definitely.
I've learned the stages of refusal. The ghosting, and then the form letter, and then the request, the bigger request, and then just the different levels of why. And what I'm grateful for is that I'm not getting that it's not well written. Like nobody is saying you need to go back to the drawing board and learn your skill.
Yeah.
What they're saying is, do you have something else? Because this isn't a good fit, but I definitely want to read more of what you write. And it's been multiple people saying that.
Yeah.
When you get one, it's like, oh, they're just being nice.
No.
But when you get a few people, you realize, okay, so I know what I'm doing. I just need to write something a little more palatable for a debut author. And since I have not a million ideas, but I have about 10 other like in progress stories that I just need to finish.
Yeah.
Two are really close to being at a point where I can start showing it to people.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. And I think it sounds like you're definitely on the right track. And I think you definitely know when you're getting, requests for full manuscripts. That's always a really great sign because they're not going to spend, their time is so limited. They're not going to spend the time on something that they don't like. All right. Joe says, diversity, acceptance, and equality are really being put in the forefront of our society and artistry too, and rightfully so. But you both set out to make that an important part of your art pretty much from the beginning. So how have you wrestled and dealt with that challenge before now? And has it evolved and changed for you in these times, and how?
Well, it has definitely evolved. When I first started, I was getting white agents telling me that my Black character wasn't Black enough. That, well, we want diversity, but she's just not quite Black enough. Her voice isn't Black. Really? Tell me, what does a Black person sound like?
What does that sound like?
And I really wish I had paid more. I was so new that it didn't occur to me to pay attention to who these people are and put them on a list of people to warn others about, because the audacity to tell a Black person that their voice is not Black enough when you are not Black. No.
Yeah, it's like that doesn't make any sense.
And then I got to we like this, but we wanted to focus on her diversity. It's not enough that she's diverse. We need that to be like the theme of the story. Why do we have to focus on Black pain for it to be a palatable story?
That's like one of my huge motivating factors as a writer, is that, I grew up reading a lot of sci-fi and fantasy. I wanted those female characters who weren't just the girlfriend, who weren't just, like the buddy on the side, who weren't just, like a part of the man's story. But then I also, by the time I'd sort of hit high school, I'd also kind of had it with the stories featuring girls. And the whole point of their struggle was that they were standing up and being like, I'm a girl, but I can still kick butt. I just wanted the stories that the boys got, but with the girl as the main character. And that is like probably 100% of the reason why I even started writing in the first place, because I was just so fed up with what I wasn't getting that I was like, all right, fine. Like, no one's going to give it to me. I have to make it myself.
I totally get that.
They both pulled off their helmets. Captain Fletcher's mouth, usually curved in a pleasant smile, was marred by a frown. Are you stopping over some missing posters, Cardell? You could go on alone while I look into it, sir. I know catching up to our schedule is important. The frown deepened. A breeze ruffled his thick hair, which was unaffected by hours under a helmet. It's against regulations for us to split up. Yes, Captain Fletcher. It is also against regulations to ignore a call for help. I don't need lectures from a unibrow on regulations. When you've been a sentinel more than 4 months, then maybe you can form an opinion. Sir, I've been a sentinel for 6 months. Captain Fletcher cursed. You know what I mean. He held up his helmet and stared down his own reflection in the visor, though it looked like he was communing with the head of some aerodynamic insect, shiny black except for the slashes of red that might have been eyebrows. It's at least 5 kids, sir. I guess you're right. If we don't do something, there'll be hell to pay. He gave her one of the aggrieved looks that he seemed to reserve just for her. You're staying out here. Captain Fletcher swung off his bike, and his boots thudded on the worn planks of the stairs. The door slammed shut behind him. Cam dismounted, tucked strands of dark hair behind her ears, smoothed out the heavy black field uniform. The horizontal bar for which fresh lieutenants had earned the name Unibrow was stitched onto the collar of her jacket. The field uniform bore no medals or honors beyond rank. She pulled out her blade and checked that it was clean. It had been her grandmother's, so it was a little too short, and she'd never liked how much it curved, but it was clean and sharp. The pistol was loaded, but who knew how much of the ammunition would actually discharge properly?
And as far as how has that evolved in these current times, I mean,
For me, people are much more open to it not being about black pain. And I'm getting a lot less of the "you don't sound black." Like I have not gotten that at all this year. And even before June, I was not getting it.
That makes me happy, and that's wonderful. I know that I had read an article like not that long ago, and well, this is probably like 5 years ago, and these things change so quickly, where sort of like the demand for African American characters in books was on the rise. And so you were seeing more representation within the books. And for 2 or 3 years, that meant more Black authors were getting published. And then it became this really disturbing trend where white authors were sort of putting more African American characters in books. And you were seeing an increase in representation in the books, the authors getting published had started to suddenly like skew the other way. And
that's where the problem is, because white authors should be able to put diversity in their books. They should be doing that. We don't live in a homogenous society, but it shouldn't mean that now somebody else doesn't get published. They should both be published.
Yeah. And it's very encouraging to hear you say that you're getting less of that request for like a specific kind of story with that kind of character. On the one hand, I feel like a huge segment of the world is sort of like trying really hard to push forward into sort of that future that like I've hoped for since I was like a little kid. And then there's like this whole other segment of the world that just is sort of like wants to shut that down.
Right. And resist.
Yeah. But I feel like there's like simultaneously this atmosphere that is like really encouraging, because I feel like things are possible, but I feel like the sort of like reaction against that now is going to be stronger than it was before, but it's not as lonely a journey to be on.
Do you have a good writing community there?
I do. Yeah. And a lot of the people I hang out with are writers, filmmakers. It's a really diverse group of like creative people, which, you know, is I think getting like multiple perspectives. And I think especially working with filmmakers was one of the most encouraging things for me as far as like going indie, because I think filmmakers far more than writers tend to be hustlers, especially
have to be.
Indie filmmakers are like constantly like scrapping for funds and for actors, and just like like pasting everything together with their own charisma and with like glue and popsicle sticks. So yeah, if you want to learn how to start like really putting yourself out there and you're a writer and you're usually an introvert, hang out with the
It was screen with film industry.
You'll learn things. Yeah. That's been an incredibly valuable experience for me. And then, yeah, I feel like the writing community here is really good, which was unexpected for me, but has made me very happy. I thought when I moved to Washington State, when I moved to the West Coast, that I was going to, I thought that I would tap into sort of the writer community there. And I was really surprised when that didn't really happen. And I was really pleasantly surprised when it turned out that it did happen here in Baltimore. How about where you are? How's your writer?
We have a very large writing community here. I'm the education chair for Henderson Writers Group, and that happens to be the largest writing group in Southern Nevada.
Ooh.
And one of the things we did this year was did a diversity and inclusion panel to help teach people how to write with inclusion and diversity in mind, with empathy and understanding, though, not just to have a token character in there, not to point to the same story over and over again, but to just genuinely put in the types of people that you see in everyday life. And this isn't just about color, it's also religion and, people who have disabilities and the LGBTQ community. In fact, we did it at the LGBTQ Center here. So it was just encouraging to see so many people come out and try to learn about this and ask tough questions, and to have a great group of panelists and teachers share their different points of view. And we had all different types of people. It just kind of ended up that way too, that we had a diverse group presenting. I chose the Nevada Artists in Residence, and it seems like the Nevada Arts Council did my job for me and selected amazing speakers. And now because of that, I was invited to speak at the Path to Publishing Act Like an Author, Think Like a Business. So I'm doing kind of a smaller version of this. That was a 5-hour workshop. This is going to be about an hour and 15 minutes. So it's a much condensed version, but the message is getting out there and people are interested in it, and they're trying to do better and they're trying to learn. And I appreciate the progress that I'm seeing in people's attitudes and willingness to learn something new.
Yeah. I really struggled in my first book. I sort of I was very naive when I was writing it. As previously mentioned, I was from a very homogenous society growing up. Fairmont, West Virginia is not exactly the diversity capital of the United States of America. And I sort of launched into writing my first book with sort of these good intentions, I guess. And I included, a character who was queer. And I finished writing the book. And then all of a sudden I started hearing about, I think it's called the dead lesbian trope. Because it had just been committed in a really popular television series. And I realized that I had done that, and it wasn't even something that I had known about. And the reason I hadn't known about it is
that doesn't mean you aren't conditioned, though, from what you're consuming.
Yeah. And I hadn't educated myself on, sort of what were the things to watch out for as I was writing that kind of character. And so I ended up having to do a lot of editing and a lot of modifications. And I lost elements of that character and of the story that I had been really attached to. But, it was an experience that, I sort of learned that you don't know what you don't know sometimes. And so you really have to make an effort to put yourself out there. And if you are going to, you should educate yourself, and you should write real characters in your stories who represent real people and the world, the way that it is. And you should not limit yourself to your own perspective. But if you're going to do it, don't be lazy about it. Make sure that what are the sins that are currently being committed by our society, and know to watch out for them so that you aren't committing and reinforcing them just because you didn't know any better.
Right. Don't perpetuate what's wrong out there because you didn't do your job.
At this point, like, I think especially now, at this point, there's not really a good excuse for not knowing, because there are so many people who are part of marginalized communities who are making such an enormous effort to educate people. And I think that if you want to know, or if you need to know, then there's no excuse for not at this juncture. And especially,
it's not the community's job to teach you either. It's your job to seek out the information.
Yes, 100%. So yeah. What did it take for you to get involved in that and like to make something like that happen? Because that sounds like an enormous undertaking.
It took a lot. I mean, there were people who, because I'm the Black member of the group, I mean, that's not the case. There are other Black people, but I'm the only Black member of the board. Mm-hmm. And so people kept coming to me, asking me questions like I was the authority on all things Black. I'm also bisexual, so I'm the authority on all things LGBTQ, because there's only one kind of gay, you know? But as offensive as that might be, they're trying, they're asking. So as the education chair, to me, it felt like this is an opportunity to teach them, not shun them, and not judge them for going about it incorrectly. And then I came up with the idea to do something, and then 2 members of the board came to me and asked me to do it. Not for themselves. They just said, I think it might be a good idea. And it was weird. It's like, well, I just made the decision to do this. It's really weird timing that you guys would come to me and ask me to do it.
Yeah.
And so I worked on trying to find a spot and trying to find the right people. And there was some resistance at first from some of the other organizations in town. There's one prestigious organization that didn't want to outright say it, but eventually when they didn't want to partner with me, because I figured this is something that would benefit the entire writing community. There was no need for it to be just my writing group. And when I went to them, their attitude was they only want to promote own voices writing, and they want to discourage people from writing outside of their own identity.
Oh, okay.
When you do that, that perpetuates that otherness. If you are only allowed to write about yourself, then your books are going to be homogenous, and to me, that would be a very boring reading. And I think own voices is extremely important, but that is a publishing issue.
Yeah.
That's not a writing issue. So
and then
I had to battle all of these different no's, and eventually I talked to the center and also Grouchy Johns. They were extremely helpful. Just all these things started coming together. We got a grant. The faculty, they were all wonderful from the beginning. I never had any issues with them. But it came together, and we ended up doing it February 29th. So it was kind of cool that we made use of that extra day.
As an author who has specifically my entire writing career been, sort of trying to hit this like point that I feel like is missing in literature, in sci-fi fantasy specifically, I feel more and more like it's 100% necessary for me to not just sort of like put forward that perspective that I feel like has been missing, but also try and also put forth perspectives that other people are missing out on too, because not everyone, who is craving certain kinds of characters is going to pick up a pen and write and find that that's their way, of expressing themselves. I was really lucky that I found sort of the thing that gives me the ability to speak that thing that I wanted to see. And like I said, I ended up smacking myself really hard in the head with it by committing this terrible sin. And I think that it would be really easy for a lot of people at that point to be like, okay, well, I just shouldn't write diverse perspectives then, because I am going to mess it up because I don't know anything about that. But that's like completely, I understand that, but also like as a white author, I think that if you are just like, okay, well, I can only write white characters because that's the only thing that I really understand, I think that you're doing both yourself and your readers a disservice. And I think that you can educate yourself and you can create representation.
I mean, how does that even make sense? How can we have historical fiction if we're only writing about things that we've lived through?
Yeah. And how do we write sci-fi and fantasy if we're only writing things that, I mean, the entire point of sci-fi and fantasy is that you're writing about things that are impossible in, you know, sort of our world. And people write about elves all the time.
Right. And look at all the different types of elves we've seen. From Keebler all the way to Tolkien, you know?
One of someone else who's on Joe's shows a lot posted an article the other day about how like writers, like a lot of writers report that experience of like their characters sort of like going off and doing their own thing. And it's just sort of like, what is the inside of your head like for like that to start happening? Like you invent other people, you make them, they're not real, but then they start doing things.
Think that. My characters talk to me. They make decisions that are not in my plan. You know, yeah. I had one come out to me like, shouldn't I have known that? You know,
yeah. You would think. You don't.
It evolved in a conversation between a mother and her daughter. And it was, how did I not know that? I wrote you.
Oh, I love it when a character, like I have this one specific character who I designed, like he's in the story to do a certain thing and he won't do it. And I'm like, now I have to create another character to complete this plot point that I mean, it's cool that you're fully realized and fleshed out to the degree that you won't do it, but also you're creating problems for me.
Right. And then are we even creating these characters, or are we just getting in tune with the muse who is sharing these characters with us, and we are just putting them on the page, and that's why they don't obey?
I will 100% get behind that theory.
Have you ever just sat and tried to write the scene? This is the beginning, this is my end goal, and they just keep, no. This is the whole point of this is for that not to happen. You know?
Yes, 100%. And I think that that's like, I don't know, that's one of the like most weird and like spectacular things about being a writer. And that's why it's sort of like my favorite medium to like dig my hands into, is that sometimes things just like happen. And it's a lot of the things that I write are really action oriented. And I'm a complete and total pacifist person, but like really violent things happen in my books. And I always kind of want to go up to people and I'm like, I just would like for you to know that I would never do like any of the things that like is doing in this book. It's just sort of, it's a thing that happens in this story and it's not my fault. Don't judge me.
It's not my fault. They didn't listen.
They got angry. I don't know what to tell you. I'm sure that this applies to acting too. So one of my best friend is a filmmaker, and his movie Butterfly Kisses, someone here in Baltimore watched it, and the main bad guy is Blinkman, and he's this guy he's a Flimmengeist who hangs out at the end of a tunnel, and you can only see him if you stare down the tunnel for an hour. But then once you see him, you can't unsee him. After that, he just keeps getting closer and closer to you until he gets you.
What's the incentive to look for him?
It's like a dare kind of thing. Like it's sort of got this whole urban legend kind of like deal going on where the teenagers go out to the train tunnel and dare each other to stare for an hour. Assuming
I can see this being terrifying on screen though.
It is. It's like a Bloody Mary kind of thing where it's like, it's this dumb thing that kids do. And the assumption is that nothing bad is going to happen because you can't even keep your eyes open that long. So yeah, I was sort of challenged to write a short story for an anthology of stories about Blinkman, who's really a very small sort of, he's the center nugget character in the movie. The movie's not really about him. It's just sort of, he's part of. So we were creating like all of these mythologies. And that was like a really challenging experience because I am so close to the filmmaker. So it's like personal when you're sort of taking the work of someone who you know really, really well, and then sort of like doing your own spin on it. And it was also a lot of fun to play with because he'd sort of not totally fleshed out Blinkman. He'd created him as an entity and then dropped him in the middle of a story. And so there was, I had this advantage of, I had visited the city that Blinkman supposedly inhabited, and I'd heard all of Eric's stories about sort of like where Blinkman came from. And then I sort of injected it with like a couple of like personal things that I was thinking about at the time. And so that was a case where on the one hand, when you're approaching something like that, there's this really strong need to sort of respect what someone else has made, especially if it's someone who you know really well. You sort of have to like respect that character, and then also sort of like add to the mythology in a way that doesn't detract from it. Which, like, actually, I've been watching a lot ever since COVID started. I've been watching a lot of like slasher series, and I think that you see that a lot. All the sequels to Halloween have a tendency to sort of be problematic because so many of them go back and try and sort of rewrite everything that came before in a way that sort of disrespects the original concept. And I think that that's where you see Paranormal Activity does a really great job of respecting the previous mythology and like building on it. I think up until probably like the last one that was in 3D, that one was terrible. But other than that, there's sort of a build in the mythology that respects what came before. And so, yeah, I think that that's really critical when you're inhabiting someone else's world. Like you have to be in the world. You have to understand what it was trying to do. And even if that's not your thing, you have to respect that. And even if you're going to like snark at it and make fun of it, you still have to do it in a way that demonstrates that you understand what it was trying to say in the first place.
Right. So, yeah. You have to honor the source.
Exactly. Very long answer to that question.
I have a shorter answer for acting, because for that, it's more about collaborating. You're collaborating with the writer. You're collaborating. Sometimes you're playing a character who actually existed, and you're also collaborating with your director. So it's not like you can just take it and run with it, because you have all of these different aspects that are coming at it. But the one role that I would say resonated most with me, and maybe it's because I just had to be this character for so long, was Cleopatra. That's the one that we just did. But we did the table read for that in December. And so really from the audition, which I believe was October, because, if you're going to audition for something, you need to at least start working on it. Mm-hmm. Start learning about her. You don't want to go in there and just read the lines. You want to go in there and be the character. Yeah. In fact, there was one scene that was in the audition that wasn't in the play. And I was really upset about that, because I thought it really spoke to the kind of woman she was. Yeah. And they cut it for length, but it was, I love that scene. And to me, it honors her more than some of the other scenes that we kept. Now, I love what they did. It's a tough thing to combine Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra and make it one play. It's, kind of mess with the timelines to make it work. So yeah. I understand their reasoning, but because I started just embracing her so much, I feel like I am forever changed
Mm.
by being this character, by playing this character. There are times where it didn't feel like I was playing her. I was just being her. And I have some friends who are actually in Baltimore, and they came out for a visit and they said, "You're different." Like, yeah, it's Cleopatra. No, I'm just grander and bolder and less likely to get kicked around because I'm just not having it.
Where thinkst thou he is now? Stands he or sits he? He's speaking now. Where's my serpent of old Nile? For so he calls me. Now I feed myself with most delicious poison, broad-fronted Caesar. When thou wast here, I was a morsel for a monarch. And great Pompey would stand and make his eyes grow in my brow. How unlike art thou, Mark Antony? How goes it with my brave Antony?
Last thing he did, dear queen, he kissed this orient pearl. His speech sticks in my heart.
Mine ear must pluck it thence.
Quoth he, the firm Roman to great Egypt sends this treasure of an oyster, at whose foot to mend the petty present, I will piece her opulent throw with kingdoms. All the East shall call her mistress.
Being a writer is, I think that the biggest thing has been the ability to sort of like live other lives and see other perspectives. And I think that that's such a really critical, thing to do as a human being, is to try and see the world from the perspective of someone who maybe you don't like, see the world from the perspective of someone who like maybe you don't completely understand, and simultaneously knowing that you'll never completely and totally understand. I think that writing, especially because language is so interwoven with like our thought processes, and that's sort of what you're like doing, is you're like molding language, just words, into like things and people and places and events. You're creating things with just words. I think that it's a really intimate experience. And I think that it is something that really, has allowed me to see the world in a way that I would not have otherwise.
So for me, I think it's that sense that what I'm doing matters to someone other than myself.
Mm.
And I don't just mean with fans, because I don't know how. I don't have a book yet, but I am blessed with a small group of super fans that will watch, buy, promote anything that I put out there. And I am so utterly grateful for them, because they validate me as an artist. And what they say is that I'm touching them.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also been able to influence other people, like in my writing group and in other writing groups. I've seen the impact that I've made in their lives, either because maybe they're adding some diverse characters to their stories, or you see them branching out and trying to do something different with their work. So as an education chair, I've been able to see the efforts that I've made pay off for somebody else. I've been able to help other people and see their work grow and see their careers grow. That is something that is very rewarding to me, because it's a lonely, lonely business. And knowing that you have people behind you and actually becoming one of those people who is now behind other people, like I have something to offer. I have something to help. That is extremely rewarding for me.
When you're like a fandom of one, because you have to be when, you're
When you start.
It's like such a weird, lonely experience. It's like, I know all these places and I know all these characters and I love them and I am like totally 100% behind them and I believe in them and I believe in this story. And then like someone else reads it and they like it too. And then they have questions and you're like, oh, this is so cool. And
right. It's funny that I've been doing all this work to try to be published, and I don't consider myself a poet, but sometimes poetry comes to me. So it's not, I don't sit down to write poetry, but it speaks to me. I'll take dictation for that, you know?
Yeah.
But my character's poem was put in a museum.
Oh.
She wrote a poem like, oh, so she has an easier time getting published than I do.